Despite all his rage, he's still just Nicolas Cage. Despite all his rage, he's still just Nicolas Cage. And someone will say his career can never be saved. Despite all his rage, he's still just Nicolas Cage.
Welcome to Just Nicolas Cage, where I very slowly work my way through Nicolas Cage's filmography, and today I'm talking about the 2009 animated superhero film, Astro Boy. In Astro Boy, Nicolas Cage plays the head of the Ministry of Science, and his young son gets disintegrated by a robot in front of his eyes. He constructs a robot that looks just like his son and programs him with his boy's memories, but he quickly finds that a robot son is an inadequate replacement and rejects him, and now Astro has to find his own way in the world. As a franchise, Astro Boy is prolific and has been very influential on pop culture. The character Astro Boy's first ever appearance was in the 1951 manga Ambassador Atom as a supporting character, until he was given his own manga series Mighty Atom in 1952. And then there were 3 different major Astro Boy anime series, a live action show, multiple video games, a gritty reimagining, a spin-off aimed at young children, plus a prequel series. The creator of Astro Boy, Osamu Tezuka, who's sometimes referred to as the father of manga, once wrote that he created the character Astro Boy to be a 21st century reverse Pinocchio. And I think the Pinocchio influence is quite apparent in most incarnations of the Astro Boy story. Even Nicolas Cage made the same connection.
I felt that it was like a sci-fi version of Pinocchio.
Because at its core, Astro Boy is about a creator who gives life to a surrogate son figure that isn't quite human, and then the boy gets sold to an exploitative showman. And the creator Tezuka also drew inspiration from other Western characters, like Betty Boop, Mickey Mouse, and Bambi, as you can tell from Astro Boy's big ol' eyes. But even though Osamu Tezuka borrowed from other pop culture, I think that his work has certainly contributed to a lot of culture too. I mean, those big ol' eyes are now an iconic defining quality in Japanese character design, which I don't think was really a popular thing in manga until Astro Boy. The 1960s Astro Boy anime is often credited as the first anime widely shown to Western audiences, and it was followed by a lot of other anime about robots and space. And you know, I always thought that Mega Man's look and vibe was always inspired by Astro Boy, but I can't find anything concrete backing that up. But in terms of more direct references, there's this guy from Persona 4. I mean, look at his hair, that's gotta be Astro influenced. There was also a whole episode of the Star Wars anime anthology Visions that was an overt homage to Astro Boy. Apparently the DuckTales reboot had an episode called Astro Boyd, and that episode even has a character in it called Detective Tezuka as a nod to the father of manga himself. But I would also like to highlight the anime Pluto on Netflix, which was adapted from a manga from 2003 by a guy named Naoki Urasawa, and that manga is partially based on Astro Boy. More specifically, it reinterprets a certain arc from Astro Boy called The Greatest Robot on Earth. But in Pluto, it's reimagined as a dark, poignant, existential murder mystery. I recommend the anime if you haven't seen it. Keith David voices Dr. Temna, which is awesome. There's a cool Benoit Blanc-looking hard-boiled detective robot guy. And you've got this scene-stealing Hannibal Lecter robot who was the first robot to kill a human in this universe. And now he's immobilized against a wall. Now, if you've ever played the Bloodborne-esque video game Lies of P, you might have encountered this NPC who's like a Riddler serial killer robot who's killed humans, and then he was immobilized to the wall in a very similar manner to the robot from Pluto. And if you played Lies of P, then you'll know that the story in that game is essentially a reimagining of Pinocchio, which quite nicely takes us full circle to where we began. So here on this channel, whenever I'm dealing with an adaptation, I like to try to watch or read the source material whenever I can. But in this case, like I said earlier, there's multiple manga and anime series to pick from, a lot of which I couldn't find readily available. And trust me, you didn't want me to read and watch all of it anyway, my videos already take long enough to make as it is. But from what I read online, it does seem like the basic story is relatively consistent through most iterations, with some exceptions. But the one I decided to go for was the 1980s anime. I watched all 52 episodes of it, and I think it's a charming show. I understand the appeal. There's goofy animation at times and some hokey voice acting.
Right now, I want to get all the uranium in Cross Island, and I'm going to follow my rule.
But to me, that's all part of the charm of watching an 80s children's anime. I was surprised though at how dark it could be at times. Like in the first episode, we see a kid in a car crash, and then it shows the young boy flatlining as he dies in the hospital. God damn, is that dark. And what's funny is a few minutes prior to that, a character said this.
After all, this is a kid's show, isn't it?
To be fair, that flatlining scene only happens in the Japanese broadcast of the first episode. And several episodes follow a straightforward structure and have an important message for children. Like there's one with a pro-environmental, anti-big business message, but the environmentalist guy gets killed by Astro Boy at the end. And there's also an episode that teaches children why it's wrong to lie, and that if you lie, you'll be beaten to death by an angry mob. Yeah, this show is pretty damn bleak at times. Like the Romeo and Juliet inspired episode where the two star-crossed lover robots die and fuse together in a burned, charred, mangled wreckage. And we hear their hearts still beating, and then the episode ends. I think that was meant to be like a bittersweet, heartwarming ending, but to me it was kind of horrifying. And actually a surprising amount of episodes end with Astro Boy mourning the brutal death of a character that just got introduced in that episode. And then some episodes are just weird as hell, like this one where a swan crashes through the window, then the swan turns into a princess, and next thing a devil man shows up with a dragon, and then they all go to what's essentially Disneyland. I mean, I'm not making this up. I will say though that I am not a fan of Astro's sister, Rain. I'm not sure if that's an unpopular opinion or not, but to me she felt like the DW of the show. But otherwise, I like the anime as a whole. But with such a long-running and iconic franchise like Astro Boy, I think a motion picture adaptation was inevitable. And there were actually a few attempts at an Astro Boy movie that never came to fruition before the one we got. In 1997, Sony Pictures bought the rights to Astro Boy, and were planning a live-action Astro Boy movie, until they heard that Spielberg was also planning on making a movie about a robot boy that replaces a family's dead son. And then at one point, Jim Henson Productions was on board for a CGI version, and a screenplay was written, but that fell apart in 2003. Then in 2004, creator of Dexter's Lab and Samurai Jack, Genndy Tartakovsky, was hired to direct a live-action /animatronics/CGI feature film version. And honestly, as a big fan of Samurai Jack, I would have loved to have seen what that would have turned out like. But that didn't end up going into production, and in 2006, Hong Kong-based animation firm Imagi Animation Studio picked the project up. The film was helmed by the director Flushed Away, and the end result was the Astro Boy movie. Here's a pop quiz, Hotshot. What do the two studios, DNA Productions and Imagi Animation Studios, both have in common? The answer is they both went into bankruptcy and permanently shut down directly after releasing a film starring Nicolas Cage. But let's chalk that up to a coincidence before we start chasing Nicolas Cage with pitchforks and burning torches. So let us finally dive into the movie. The film is quite faithful as a whole to the story of Astro Boy, as far as I could tell as a relative newcomer to the franchise. The basic setup is definitely there, but I was actually impressed by how many references and Easter eggs to the original there were in the movie. Firstly, there's multiple characters from the original Astro Boy story that appear here. I know that's not much to ask, but they could have completely changed or cut or bastardized these characters for the Western audience, where Dr. Tenma, Dr. Elephant, Ham-Egg, and Daddy Walrus all mostly look and act like they're supposed to. Yeah, that's right, a character in a children's anime was named Daddy Walrus. Personally, I think that sounds like the name of a male porn star, but that's just me. And you've got this character in the movie who's modeled after the creator of Astro Boy, Osamu Tezuka. You can tell by his cool beret. And Tezuka's trademark was this little pig thing that often cropped up hidden in his various work. And it actually makes an appearance in the movie, which is a deep cut. I respect that. And even that weird alien thing at the end of the movie is a reference to the man-made solar sphere that shows up in several iterations of Astro Boy. And by the way, I skimmed through the episode of the 60s anime where that thing appears so I could find clips. And oh boy, thank God they didn't adapt this for the movie. I also like that the movie had an attempt at moral messages, just like the original did. It touches on environmental concerns, with the bad guy choosing to use a highly unstable energy source over a clean and self-sustaining one. There's also classism, with the members of the elitist floating paradise city dumping their garbage down to the poor surface dwellers below with no regard. The whole thing with the floating city was made up just for this movie. At least as far as I could tell, it wasn't in any other iteration of Astro Boy. But I quite liked it as a backdrop bit of world building for the story. I've seen people point out that Battle Angel Alita did it first, but then again Astro Boy did the whole young robot construct with big ol' eyes concept before Alita, so what you gonna do? And also there's obviously the overall message of acceptance in the movie, with the hero being rejected for being superficially different and other people coming to terms with that. And all of that felt quite in line with the kind of messaging that you would find in the original source material. Well, outside of the multiple references to American politics, which I thought was a bit out of place. You've got the corrupt president who starts an unjustified war in the hopes of getting re-elected. That to me felt like a jab at George W. And there's also what I think is a little reference to Obama's campaign when it says it's not time for a change. And there's also a whole color-coded morality symbolism thing in the movie, in that blue means good and red means bad, which could also be a political thing, but that might be a bit of a stretch. One thing that the movie switched up quite a bit was the way the boy dies at the start. In most iterations of Astro Boy, Toby is killed in some sort of vehicular collision, but in the Astro Boy movie, Toby goes to visit his dad at the Ministry of Science and sneaks into an area he shouldn't go to. He gets trapped with the robot who's just been overloaded with unstable red energy by the president, and the kid gets blasted to death. To me, it's a lot more visceral and kind of darker than the other versions. He is vaporized, so we don't get a moment where we see the child's corpse, but what makes it dark for me is that here Dr. Tenma is there to witness it. We see a kid futilely banging on the glass while his father watches helplessly. It really is tragic stuff. I'm also just kind of glad that the movie had the balls to have a cute little kid get vaporized to death within the first 15 minutes of an animated family movie. At least they didn't chicken out and make him be in a coma with its consciousness implanted into a robot or some bullshit. Nah, that boy is straight up dead. Another major change is that Dr. Temna doesn't entirely disappear from the story after the first act in this movie. In the first episode of the 80s anime, Dr. Tenma chastises Astro Boy, then Astro Boy is taken away by the circus guy, and then Dr. Tenma is never seen again in the show. I was waiting the whole series for him to make a reappearance. Alright, episode 12, still no Dr. Tenma. Episode 33, no Dr. Tenma. Alright, it's episode 52, it's the finale, he's gotta pop up back here. No, it's just an episode where Astro Boy meets a female robot and she dies and he ends up swapping out her legs for his. Okay. According to Wikipedia, in the 60s anime after Tenma sells Astro to the circus in the first episode, Tenma isn't heard from again until episode 97, where it's implied that he's either been institutionalized or that he's killed himself. Jesus. From what I read, the 2003 version takes quite an interesting approach, where Dr. Tenma himself becomes a main antagonist of the series, as he sees his creation as a twistedly messianic figure, whom he ultimately concludes will lead the robotic population to overthrow humanity, which I actually think sounds like a pretty cool idea for a story arc. And then he tries to kill himself. Of course he does. But in the movie, Dr. Tenma's arc starts the same way as all the rest. The grieving father who's given a second chance, he wants the robot to fill in for his son, but comes to the realization that this surrogate just serves as a constant reminder to him that his son is dead. So he calls for him to be deactivated, straight up telling the boy, I don't want you anymore. Despite the fact that this robot is programmed with his son's memories, which really is a heartbreaking moral dilemma when you think about it. It's almost some Black Mirror type shit. In fact, it reminds me quite a bit of the Domo Gleason episode of Black Mirror Be Right Back, where Domo Gleason's character dies and his partner Haley Atwell gets an android that looks identical to him, and it attempts to emulate his behavior based on his social media posts. But she ultimately realizes that there's some things that the automaton can't replicate, and she becomes frustrated at the replicant's mere existence. And I think there's similar vibes in this movie. Although I do think that this portion of the story could have been elaborated on a bit more. I think they should have spent more time showing Tenma's slow realization that Astro's just not the same as his son. But that whole thing is just kind of rushed here, which is a shame. And then Tenma's not in the movie again until the third act, where he stops Astro from being destroyed, ultimately coming to the conclusion that even though this robot might not be Toby, he's still his son, which I think is a nice resolution to Tenma's arc, and at least he even has an arc, unlike some other versions. In terms of the animation, this movie deviates from the anime hand-drawn style, and instead is CGI animated and adopted a more Western look. I personally don't love the character designs they went for here, especially Astro's. I think they lost a lot of the charm from his original design. I miss his little short body and the little eyelashes of his. Although it might have been the right call that he's not shirtless and trouserless for most of the movie here like he usually is. I never was a fan of that choice for the character, so that's a welcome change. But apparently the filmmakers thought that the large eyes and curly eyelashes made him look too feminine, which is kind of bullshit if you ask me. And also the design team made him look like a 13-year-old to appeal to a larger audience. But I just think it's a little sad that this character that was a product of the godfather of manga and influenced countless manga and anime has now become this uncanny valley looking CGI creation. It feels a bit like when Studio Ghibli made that ugly looking computer animated movie. I would have personally preferred something like the 2003 Astro Boy anime visual style, but with a bigger budget. I think that would have looked really cool. But obviously part of it comes down to personal preference. And also I just watched 52 episodes of the 80s anime, so I'm accustomed to him looking like this in 2D animation. But outside of that, I do think the animation is solid. I think some of the other robots look cool, and the set pieces are genuinely visually impressive. I like the flying chase through the city. The Coliseum fights were really fun with the battle against the Sawblade robot, the little stinker, and the 1 vs 3 fight. And the final climax is very good, actually. It's a legitimately entertaining action sequence that makes good use of the visuals. Now, the comedy in this movie is a bit of a mixed bag. There's this scene that a lot of people have criticized.
I got machine guns in my butt.
I'm not a big fan of that scene myself either, mainly because the butt machine guns were a cute, quirky part of the original show that didn't need to be addressed. It's an ass machine gun, let that speak for itself. And there's some other lame jokes that were kinda eye-roll inducing.
2 arms!
I've got 3 arms.
But there's also a couple of jokes that I thought were legit kind of funny. Like when a scared soldier's face screen reads, body fluid status, sudden release. And there's also this joke that I thought was quite good, almost like something out of The Simpsons.
Hey, haven't you forgotten something? What have they forgotten, son?
Grace?
Exactly. Grace!
What?
Turn on the TV, sweetheart, would you please?
This movie also has a lot of comedic side characters. And the 80s show had stuff like that too, with Urain and Astro's classmate Alvin, who I never really liked. But here there's a bunch of wacky comic relief robots with varying degrees of success. There's Eugene Levy as this nervous, neurotic robot who has a couple of mildly amusing moments. You also have these two cleaning products robots who are kind of annoying. And then there's the Robot Revolutionary Front, an anti-capitalist trio of robots which includes Mike the Fridge. I honestly think that's a really fun concept. The idea of communist robots is great, but they're pretty much superfluous to the story and there's no payoff to them, despite the fact that they keep popping up back into the movie. There's even a line where the movie straight up addresses how useless they were. Also, this R2-D2 trash can dog looking thing is pretty cute. As for the rest of the cast and characters, well, Astro is voiced by Freddie Highmore, who you may know from the clip of the guy yelling, "I'm a surgeon," but I actually think that Freddie Highmore gives a solid vocal performance. He was good here. In terms of Astro's characterization, the character is fine and it's fun seeing him discover his own capabilities, but I kind of feel like Astro doesn't have enough individual character moments. The movie moves by so fast that he gets a bit lost in the shuffle of all the other stuff going on. So let's move on to my boy Nicolas Cage as Dr. Tenma. Nick Cage said that he grew up watching the 1960s Astro Boy on television, which is cool. And apparently the animators of the movie modeled Dr. Tenma's face after Nick Cage. And I guess I can kinda see it, but also is it just me or does the president in the movie also kinda look like him at times? I found an interview where Nick Cage said that when recording his performance in the movie, in order to match the animation, the vocalization sometimes had to go in a place that was more abstract or bizarre. And obviously I'm always down for that. Nicolas Cage is the king of the quirky line delivery. But the thing is, I don't think there's any point in the movie where I would describe his vocalization as bizarre or abstract. And instead I found his performance to be underwhelming and kind of flat at times.
Because it can't. If the red and the blue core come together, well, you both die. The president is right. It's just a machine.
He is playing a serious character, a man that's mourning the death of his son, so there's not that much room for him to go full Nicolas Cage here. But at the very least, we could have got a big breakdown when his son died, but instead it's a more quiet moment.
Toby. It's all my fault.
Which I don't think really worked, especially when the facial animation isn't good enough to let the visuals do the heavy lifting. And even when his character is meant to be unhinged, Cage kinda seems to underplay it.
It's gonna make it perfect. Perfect! Just like Toby was.
And even though his character has a decent amount of screen time in the first act, he doesn't have that much dialogue. There's a lot of shots of him looking pensive, but why get Nicolas Cage if you're not gonna have him say that much? He does have some moments where his acting carries through, but because it's a character that has to face such an interesting moral predicament, and the fact that it's Nicolas Cage in an anime adaptation, I just wanted a little bit more. Donald Sutherland is also kinda underwhelming here as the villain. I hesitate to say that he's phoning it in, but something feels off.
I'm declaring a state of national emergency. Leave for all military personnel is canceled until Tenma's boy is found.
I'd call him miscast, but he's playing a ruthless, power-hungry dictator. And that's essentially what he played in the Hunger Games, and he was pretty good there. It might just come down to Donald Sutherland not being used to giving voice performances. Because obviously voice acting and live-action acting are two very different things. And being good at one doesn't necessarily translate to the other. But I thought Donald Sutherland was pretty good in The Simpsons, so I don't know what happened here. And the character he plays, President Stone, isn't particularly interesting either. And while I appreciate the political satire despite its lack of subtlety, I think this movie needed a more larger-than-life adversary. President Stone is a character that was made up for this movie, but Astro Boy's villain roster is quite the rogues gallery. I think there was plenty of great existing characters to pick from, like this sleazeball thug called Skunk, whose character design was originally modeled after Richard Widmark's character from the 1947 film Kiss of Death. And by the way, this is the third Nicolas Cage movie that I've realized has some sort of connection to the 1947 Kiss of Death. That feels like a rabbit hole waiting to be explored. But there's also the character Atlas, who is one of my favorite parts of the 80s anime. He's a recurring villain that was created using the same design as Astro, essentially making him a brother. Except he was raised for evil to become the dictator of Earth. And also in his first form he has blonde hair and orange skin. Insert Trump joke here. There's also Pluto from the Greatest Robot on Earth story arc, although that might be too lengthy and meaty of a storyline to also be in the origin story movie, fair enough. There's Lamp, a businessman who's a sworn enemy against the establishment of robot rights, and he's basically just a more interesting version of President Stone. There's Blue Knight, who I didn't come across in the series I watched, but from what I've seen he seems like a cool villain. And also, as I talked about earlier, the 2003 anime apparently has Dr. Tenma as a main villain. That could have been really interesting, and at the very least it would have given Nicolas Cage more to do. And I think all of those options would have been more compelling than the generic bad president man that we got in this movie. Bill Nighy voices Dr. Elephant, and he's fine, I suppose, but once again, this is a Nick Cage animated movie that kind of squanders the great Bill Nighy. He's just kind of here for the exposition and to be the rational voice of reason next to Tenma. Apparently Bill Nighy wanted to do a funny voice for the character, but he was advised against it. But he does get to do a fun voice for one of the communist robots.
And I'm Robotsky, the muscle.
I actually didn't even realize that that was Bill Nighy until I watched the behind the scenes. But speaking of underused actors, Samuel Jackson voices this big-ass Blitzcrank from League of Legends looking robot, but he only has like 3 lines in the whole movie, so what's the point of getting Sam Jackson? There's a bunch of generic human kid characters too, and the only one who has any real character development is this girl voiced by Kristen Bell. Kristen Bell is alright in the role, but it does kind of feel like the movie producers just needed a female character in the movie, and quickly came up with this character and shoehorned her into the story. And she does have a character arc, but it just felt like a bit of an afterthought. I know I've been kind of critical of the voice cast, but you know who fully understood the assignment? Nathan Goddamn Lane. He's this Fagin from Oliver Twist type guy who takes in orphan kids, and Nathan Lane legitimately does a great job in the role.
Hold it right there, Twinkle Toes. What are you, some kind of ice skater? You planning on ballroom dancing with this guy? Or are you gonna fight him?
When Nathan Lane showed up, I was like, now this is a voice actor. I think Nathan Lane has a voice and style of acting that naturally works well for animation, and I think he elevated a role that could have been somewhat forgettable otherwise. So overall, this movie is fine. The voice acting can be lacking at times, the villain is underwhelming, and the whole thing just feels kind of rushed. But I can't say that I didn't enjoy it. I think it's mostly quite respectful to the source material. It has some impressive visuals, and there's genuinely poignant moments and clever concepts in there. I just couldn't help but wish that stuff was pushed to the forefront instead of some of the more wacky, meandering parts. It is a bit of a shame that there was never a sequel, because I think if they learned from what worked and didn't work in this movie, they could have made a really cool second one. Especially if they adapted something like the Greatest Robot on Earth story arc. I can't quite recommend that you go out of your way to watch the Astro Boy movie, but in the world of animated movies that have Nicolas Cage in it, you could certainly do a lot worse. So the next movie Nicolas Cage was in was Kick-Ass. So until then, thanks for watching.